Row Zero is a spreadsheet for big data that makes it easy to calculate percentiles and pivot tables. In this video, we'll show how to use the built-in percentile calculation in pivot tables. To get started, I've imported a sample dataset of US flight data. There's 7.2 million rows of data, one row for each flight in the US for 1 year. And I'm going to create some pivot tables to analyze flight delays by airport. So let me select my data, insert pivot table, and I'm going to drop it on a new sheet. And I want to look at flight delays by airport, so I'll pull airport to rows. That's going to give me every airport with one row for each airport. And then I'm going to pull delay to values, and here's where I can choose my calculations. You can see I have a number of options. I'm going to choose percentiles. I can choose from P10, which is 10th percentile, all the way up to P99.9. I'm going to first start with just choosing quartiles, so I'll choose P25, and then P50, and P75. So I got my quartiles, and I want to calculate the interquartile range, which is just P75 minus P25. And you can see I can easily add a calculated column, and that's going to give me my interquartile range. And you saw that that formula dynamically updated every row in the pivot table. Now let's do the full 5-number summary. So let's add min and max to this. So min flight delay and max flight delay. This is going to give me the full 5-number summary. And what you'll notice here is that when working with a big non-normal data set like this, min, median, and max can kind of be useless. So when you have 7 million rows of data, the min and the max are going to be extreme values that really don't tell you much about the distribution. And then for this particular data set, most flights are on time, so the median value actually is pretty useless for delays because it's actually a negative number because most flights are on time. So this is where looking at percentiles like P90 or P99 are a lot more useful. So let's add in P90 and P99 and see what those look like. So 90th percentile flight delay, and let's look at 99th percentile flight delay. So this is not going to be the max, but it's going to give me a good indication of what a typical bad flight delay is. So the way you'd read P90 flight delay is this is the 10% worst flights at this airport, and P99 is the 1% worst flights at this airport. So this gives you a sense of what a typical delay would look like at one of these airports. Now the really powerful thing about pivot table percentiles is that they are percentiles of whatever pivot table row and column aggregations you set. And the percentiles dynamically update as you edit the pivot table or as you update source data. So for example, I can change airport to carrier, and it's going to dynamically update everything in the pivot table. I can also change this to date and choose my date aggregation, so I'll choose month. So this is going to give me a distribution of flight delays by month. And I can chart this, so let's look at the P90 and P99 percentiles for flight delays by month. So select our columns and we'll insert a chart, and we can give this a quick title, so we'll call it flight delays, and you have a lot of different options for configuring your charts. Let me just make this a little bit smaller because I'm pretty zoomed in, and I'll just drop it right here. I can also add a filter to my pivot table, and so let's look at just flights in the morning. So I'm going to add a filter for departure time is less than 1200, and what you'll notice is literally as I'm typing in these numbers, it is dynamically updating the pivot table in the chart. So even though there's 7 million rows of data here, everything is essentially updating instantly. And that's because Row Zero is specifically engineered to be super fast with big data. In every scenario, it applies the aggregations and filters and then finds the percentile. So it gives you a lot of ways to slice your data. One last thing I'll show is the percentile function. So in addition to pivot table percentiles, you can also use the percentile function in formulas. So I'll quickly demonstrate that. So I'll drop a couple of percentiles in here. So one, which would be 100th percentile or max. I'll do P99, P95, we'll do P50, and we'll also just do P33 to show something specific here. And I just type in equals percentile, and then I'm going to choose for values, the data to compute the percentile for. So I'll go back to my flights data set. I'm going to select the delay column, and then I'm going to select the specific percentile that I want to compute here. And then I can just double click to drag. So you can see this gives you some more fine-grained control over looking up specific percentiles over a data set. So as you can see, Row Zero makes it very easy to analyze big data sets with dynamic pivot tables. And even though there's millions of rows, the pivot tables update instantly. You can try Row Zero for free at rowzero.io and see why Row Zero is the best spreadsheet for big data.